public service was one of the primary reasons that a television station could be licensed. And it either is or should be today. Public service has been a very large part of the station from the day it went on the air.
Hello, this is Tidewater Viewpoint, and I'm Joel Carlson.
We had a public service man called Joel Carlson, and he had a strange name. He was called Mr. Knife and Fork because he went to every luncheon and every dinner that ever existed in all the Tidewater area.
WTKR has had a very strong commitment to public service, both in 60, right on through the years.
Help the boys clubs of America today, and you'll help yourself to a better USA.
Right you are, boys. Boys clubs do help build a better USA.
Public service is more than helping people raise money for a charitable drive or one of the health organizations. Public service is letting them know that the station is there to provide a service. And it takes so many different forms.
One of the last witnesses called today was the commanding officer.
News became popular public service commitment that the station and all stations rallied to. Also, the networks did much more.
But the first newscasts were very short. It was a lot of Associated Press or United Press International copy, some local copy in between. And when I got here 3 years into the act, there were 4 people in the news department at that time.
When I was here in the 60s, and I think probably up into the 70s, the newscast was written by one person. You had one anchor, and there was a writer.
We are so much more capable of covering the news today than we were in those days.
That gives you an idea of the appearance of this U.S. naval port here in Norfolk as the ships began to arrive and get themselves dressed up for the International Naval Review.
They had ships from each NATO nation here lined up out in the harbor, and the Canberra, USS Canberra, was a review ship. And I had the camera set up on the Canberra, and we went, steamed up and back where the ships were. We had a photographer in a helicopter that shot aerials of it. That was Jack Will.
We covered the closing of the Norfolk schools when massive resistance was enacted in Richmond by the state legislature. We covered the sit-in demonstrations when the students went to the downtown Woolworth store and tried to get served at the lunch counter there.
And they were abused, they were bitten by police dogs, they were hit with hoses, they were hit with truncheons, they were arrested. And again, TV News covered that.
5, 4, 3, 2, 0, T-minus 0.
Some of the most spectacular events from television coverage was in our space coverage. The flight of Alan B. Shepard, who was the local guy, so to speak, even though he wasn't from here. But Alan Shepard, lived in Bay Colony at Virginia Beach. The other 6 astronauts lived over on the other side of the peninsula in Hampton. There was a lot of interest there, of course. We had these fellows who were in the studio a lot in those days. These 7 original Mercury astronauts were our own local celebrities, so to speak. I just think that space coverage was just the pinnacle for television. It was a made-for-television event. The news is very good at covering catastrophes, and the Ash Wednesday storm that we had in the early 60s was the closest thing to a weather phenomenon catastrophe that I had seen in our area.
Dick McCoy called me about, I think it was 5 o'clock in the morning at home, and said he had heard that there was some high water in Ocean View. Volkswagens were floating down the median. People were rowing boats up and down Ocean View Avenue.
Some of television's finest days came on days that were some of the worst for the country. John F. Kennedy's assassination. From the time it was first reported that the president had been shot, and that was Walter Cronkite who told us that, until the time a while later when we found out that the president indeed had died in Dallas, Texas. They're some of the most dramatic moments I've ever seen on television. I recall, though, being here and having people call on the telephone and complain because the afternoon soap operas weren't on.
More than the assassination was the live coverage of the assassin himself being gunned down, because that was so totally unexpected and was live. I mean, they had that right there and it was on the air.
The MacArthur funeral was probably the largest and most difficult thing we ever attempted to do.
We fed the pictures to the 3 networks live.
We had 5 mobile units that we rented from various and sundry television stations up and down the East Coast.
Many of the little ones had already been tucked in their beds. The older ones sitting around watching television. Everything seemed to be right with the world. And it was then that it happened. The whole world seemed to explode.
But the finest moment that this news department ever had was early in the 60s. And that's when 2 military aircraft collided midair over Hampton and crashed into a residential area. It was a tragic story. It was a very fast developing story. We did an hour instant documentary, and I had 5 minutes of script when we started at 10 o'clock. And that kept bringing me 5 minutes out at a time. And we finished the last 5 minutes, 5 minutes before 11. That was this department's finest hour.
The 9th Infantry is carried into battle aboard small Navy troop transports, many of which are manned today by Tidewater sailors.
I think you have to remember that the sheer novelty of somebody from this station having been halfway around the world to a war zone was just dramatic to the point that you can't imagine. I mean, this guy was actually over there in the war zone.
The Russians coming here to the Norfolk Naval Base, I don't think there'll be another story in quite some time to top that, just due to the significance where Russian warships sail into the Chesapeake Bay and Hampton Roads, and hey, these are the guys we're supposed to be mad at, and they're supposed to be mad at us, and it didn't turn out that way at all. And that story will always go down in my mind as one of the biggest stories we ever covered, and of course we did that live the whole time they were here.
When Moments to Remember continues, we'll remember a few veteran News 3 personalities.